Ooh, my latest issue of the Explorer just came, and it's got this great article by Jane Forsyth, Linking Geology and Botany. A new approach. Wow. And Jane tells us that the geology of Ohio kind of divided into two parts. In the west, it's sort of flat because it was underlain by fairly erodible limestone and dolomite. And it's in the east, there's some erosion-resistant sandstone, so it has more relief. It's also acidic in nature. And she explains why it's like that, that before this erosion took place, at the end of the Paleozoic era, there was this arch. I think it had something to do with the Allegheny Mountains forming, and it was tilted with the higher ground in the western part of the state and lower in the east, and erosion cut where the arch was the highest, and that's why we have older rocks in the western part of Ohio. And this erosion was done by the Taze River system. Here's a map of Ohio that shows the arch, and again, if you can visualize that it was higher in the west and then got eroded down further because it was higher, that there would be older rocks exposed in the west, and that is how it is. Here's a map that shows the types of bedrock we have and what geologic periods they come from, and in the west is the older Ordovician, and then there's Silurian and Devonian and Carboniferous and Permian. And you know, the Carboniferous has coal, and that's why it's eastern Ohio. That's why it's called Carboniferous. It means carbon bearing. There's also that drainage system called the Taze River, which swept northwest across present-day Ohio and then joined the Mississippi embayment. And that is believed to influence plant distribution in Ohio too. There were glaciers that invaded Ohio between a million years ago and 20,000 years ago. Several successive ones, the most recent one being the Wisconsinian. I'm not going to try to say that again. And it was slowed when it got to the Hocking Hills, did a little sightseeing, stopped off at the Old Man's Cave, and just decided to melt. No, wait, let's start over. It was slowed by these steep-sided sandstone hills. And here's a glacial map of Ohio, showing the glacial boundary cutting across from mid-southern Ohio up to northeastern Ohio. Glaciers, they deposited two types of things. Till, which is basically an unsorted mix of sand and gravel caused when the glaciers melted, and then local deposits of sand and gravel. And as a result, different kinds of substrates for plants. Much of western Ohio is plains that are flat and have clayey, limey till, which is impermeable, so it gets sort of saturated in the springtime, and it's fairly high in nutrients. It's associated with the high pH chemistry. In eastern Ohio, there's bedrock, sandstone bedrock, which is permeable, and it's very acid, and it's very low in nutrients. So plants that are distributed in relation to these types of substrates, Jane gives us many examples, and let's share them with you. Blue ash, Fraxinus quadrangulata. This map shows very distinctly that it's found in the western till plains, and also very deeply concentrated in the outcroppings of limestone up in the Erie Islands. And this is blue ash. Blue ash is Fraxinus quadrangulata, and you'll see that the stems are indeed winged, four-angled. Here's a close-up showing that. Here's the fruits of blue ash. They're kind of big, broad, sort of twisted, not as narrow as the samaras of green ash. Here's a plant that has an intriguing story to it. It's called Sullivantia sullivantii, and this is one that's located right about at the glacial boundary and damp sandstone cliffs. Here's a picture of Sullivantia growing on a damp, shady sandstone cliff in Hocking County, and this is a picture of it in flower. Sullivantia is a cool plant because of its nomenclatural history. It's named after someone named Sullivan. Sullivan is a name you might have heard. You've heard of Sullivan Hall and Sullivan Avenue. It turns out that Lucas Sullivan, not the one the plant is named after, was basically founded Columbus. He was a land surveyor and landowner and a big prominent family, and basically started Columbus. And one of his sons, William Starling Sullivan. Oh, these are grave markers in Green Lawn Cemetery. And this is William Starling Sullivan was a very, very prominent botanist, sometimes called the father of bryology because he was an expert in mosses, but he was also an expert in vascular plants as well. And this marker here is his second wife, Eliza Sullivan. And this is another angle showing the picture. Born 1803, died 1873. And here's a close-up of Eliza's grave marker. And look, her likeness is festooned, adorned with the plant Sullivantia, which is named after her husband. Wow. There are two oaks that kind of look alike, but they are strikingly different in their distribution. Here's one called chestnut oak, Quercus montana. And you can see these dots are almost all in the acidic half of the state, the sandstone half of the state. Here's another illustration showing what I just told you. In case you're interested, I mean, of course you're interested, because you're interested in the field recognition of these oaks, which is like, what Ohio Plants, the course, is about. There are two oaks that look fairly similar, and one of them is a nice acidophile. That's the one we're talking about right now, called Quercus montana. And you can see that it's very shallowly and sort of bluntly lobed. Another species that's similar but has an exactly opposite affinity that is found in calcareous sites, called Quercus muhlenbergii, chinkapin oak. It has sharp lobes, almost teeth, you could say. But it's not. They're not teeth. It's a member of the white oak group. So let's take a look at some of the plants that are generally associated with limestone, sometimes outcroppings of limestone or fairly calcareous soil conditions. And Jane Forsyth points out a bunch of trees and shrubs and a bunch of herbaceous plants. Let's take a look at some of these plants. Ooh, redbud. I've seen a lot of redbud in the Hocking Hills, but you'll see more of it in the limestony areas. It's a tree that flowers in the springtime with these beautiful lavender blossoms. Eastern red cedar is a conifer, which, again, you'll see it sometimes in the Hocking Hills, but you'll see it super, super abundant in the limestone soils, especially dry limestone soils. Here's eastern red cedar showing the ovulate cones when they're just beginning to form. And here's an ovulate cone about a year old. I guess it is exactly a year old. And it is actually a cone. The scales are fused together and it kind of is fleshy like a berry, but they're totally not berries because this is a gymnosperm. Here's a tree that's in the elm family. It's called hackberry. Distinctive by the bark. It's got these very deep furrows. And the leaves are kind of indistinctive, but they have this typical elm characteristic, which is having an unequal base and being toothed. And also coming off of the branch in sort of flat sprays, 180 degrees across from each other. One of the things about hackberry is that even though it's kind of indistinctive, it's got some abnormalities, if you will, that are so frequent that maybe they're not abnormalities. But anyway, these are galls, these thimble-shaped galls caused by, I can't remember, maybe a midge, which is kind of fly, but that's kind of a guess. And there's also these witches' brooms, these little proliferations of branches that are caused by a fungus. This is fragrant sumac. It's similar in leaf shape to poison ivy. It's closely related to it. It's in the genus Rhus, and it's Rhus aromatica. appropriately named because it's very fragrant. This is a strict calciphile. The aforementioned blue ash, the aforementioned chinkapin oak in the white oak group with a fairly pointed lobes. This is a tree in the birch family called hop hornbeam. It's the genus Australia. This is Australia virginiana. And it's called that because these fruit clusters kind of look like hops, like what's used to flavor beer. Here's an article from a newspaper where the author was heralding the arrival of a very, very early flowering wildflower called snow trillium that actually flowers in, this was in March, late March. And this is snow trillium. It's a very strict calciphile that can be found along the banks of the Scioto River, which is where it was described to science in the 19th century, and a few other places. It's not very common. This is a type of what's called bluets, with misleading. It's not in the mustard family. It's in the Rubiaceae, the coffee family. This is a type of bluets in the genus Houstonia. And here's a plant called Herb Robert. It's a type of a geranium, kind of a strict calciphile. So, next up, let's take a look at plants that are characteristically found on the till plains of western Ohio.